Elias sat at the small, scarred wooden table of his mountain cabin, the pale morning light struggling to pierce the remaining fog. Before him lay the black leather ledger and the charcoal map, the weights of a 30-year-old crime. His hands, which had spent 3 decades carving wood and tending to his solitude, now trembled with a different kind of energy. It wasn't fear, but a cold, sharpened resolve. He looked at the Muher Yuzu signet ring impression on the contract one last time. For 30 years he had been the ghost of Whispering Pines. Tonight he would become its conscience. Clara sat across from him, her eyes tired but fierce. They both knew that once they walked down that mountain today, there was no returning to the lives they had before. Down in the village square, Whispering Pines had transformed into a grotesque display of forced joy. Brightly colored banners hung from the same rafters that had once been scorched by the mill fire. The air, usually thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, was now overwhelmed by the smell of roasting meats and expensive imported perfumes. The Festival of Renewal was meant to celebrate the town's prosperity since the Great Frost, but to Elias, watching from the shadows of the alleyways, it looked like a mask. Every laugh sounded hollow, and every decoration felt like a bandage over a festering wound. The villagers, dressed in their Sunday finest, walked over the very ground where Elias's life had been reduced to ash, blissfully unaware of the price he had paid for their comfort. A large wooden podium had been erected in front of the great clock tower, draped in deep blue velvet and gold trim. At the center sat the mayor, looking every bit the benevolent patriarch the town believed him to be. His silver hair caught the light, and his smile was as practiced as a stage actor's. He greeted the wealthy families with a firm handshake, the same hands that had signed the scapegoat contract 30 years ago. Elias watched him from behind a stack of merchant crates, feeling the heat of the stolen ledger through Clara's satchel. The hypocrisy was a physical weight in the air. The mayor wasn't just celebrating the town's survival, he was celebrating the success of his greatest deception. Clara moved through the crowd like a whisper, her archivist's cloak blending into the gathering twilight. Her task was to position herself near the town's elders, the ones who still remembered the heat of the fire and the coldness of the trial. Elias, meanwhile, moved toward the back of the podium, his heart hammering a rhythm of retribution against his ribs. He passed people he had once called friends, men who had shared bread at his table before turning their backs when the first wisp of smoke appeared. They didn't recognize him. To them, he was just another old man lost in the festivities, a shadow among the living. The irony was not lost on him. He had been invisible for 30 years, and now that invisibility was his greatest weapon. As the sun dipped below the jagged peaks of the pine forest, the music died down, and the mayor stepped to the microphone. A hush fell over the square, broken only by the crackle of the ceremonial bonfires lit at the corners of the plaza. 30 years ago, the mayor began, his voice booming with a rehearsed warmth. We stood in the ashes of our greatest tragedy. We lost our mill, our livelihoods, and almost our hope. But look at us now. We rose from those ashes. We built a new Whispering Pines, stronger and wealthier than before. We removed the rot that threatened us, and we thrived. Elias felt the bile rise in his throat. The rot the mayor referred to was Elias himself, and the renewal was built on the insurance money of a premeditated crime. Just as the mayor raised a crystal glass to toast the town's future, a figure stepped from the darkness behind the podium. The movement was slow, deliberate, and carried the weight of 3 decades of silence. Elias walked into the pool of bright light, his old wool coat tattered, and his beard white as the mountain frost. A murmur rippled through the front rows of the crowd, a wave of confusion that slowly curdled into a collective gasp of recognition. The glass in the mayor's hand didn't shatter, but his smile did. For a heartbeat, the only sound in the entire square was the snapping of the bonfires and the heavy rhythmic ticking of the silent clock tower above them. "Do you remember me, Arthur?" Elias's voice was not a shout, but it carried to the very back of the square, honed by years of speaking to nothing but the wind and the trees. He stood at the edge of the podium, the ledger held high in his right hand like a holy relic. The mayor recoiled, his face turning the color of ash. "Elias," he stammered, his voice losing its practiced resonance. You were forbidden from returning. This is a celebration. Guards, remove this madman." But the guards hesitated. There was something in Elias's eyes, a terrifying, calm clarity that stayed their hands. The villagers leaned forward, the festive atmosphere replaced by a chilling, electric tension that made the hair on their necks stand up. Elias didn't wait for the guards. He opened the ledger to the year of the Great Frost and began to read. He didn't read about the fire, he read about the debts. He read the names of the men sitting in the front row, the amounts they owed, and the bankruptcy that had been looming over every household in Whispering Pines. 30 years ago, you weren't prosperous, Elias said, his voice cutting through the mayor's desperate protests. You were starving, you were losing your homes, and you needed a miracle, or, as the mayor decided, you needed a sacrifice. He turned the brittle pages until he reached the folded parchment with the signet seal. "This is not a story," Elias shouted, his voice finally breaking into a roar. "This is a contract, signed by your mayor 2 days before the mill burned. It guarantees the payout of the insurance to cover the private debts of this council, provided the mill was accidentally destroyed." He held the document out so the elders in the front row could see the cold blue wax of the seal, the same seal the mayor still wore on his finger. A woman in the front row, the widow of a man who had testified against Elias, began to weep. The truth was hitting the crowd like a physical blow, a wave of heat more intense than any bonfire. The mayor's composure finally snapped. He lunged for the ledger, his face contorted with a frantic, animalistic fear. "It's a forgery!" he screamed, spit flying from his lips. "He's a bitter old man, an arsonist trying to hide his shame with lies." But Clara stepped forward then, holding up the old mining map they had found in the vault. "The tunnels, Arthur," she said, her voice steady and clear. "The tunnels that lead from your cellar to the mill's foundation. The tunnels you used to carry the oil while the town was sleeping. We found the charcoal marks. We found the truth you buried beneath the tower." The crowd erupted into a chaotic roar, half in anger at the mayor, half in shock at their own 30-year blindness. The festive bonfires were no longer symbols of renewal. They were mirrors of the fire that had started it all. The villagers began to surge toward the podium, their faces twisted with a mix of guilt and fury. They had hated Elias for 30 years because it was easier than looking at their own poverty. Now they saw that their prosperity was a gift from the man they had destroyed. The mayor looked around, his eyes darting like a trapped rat's, but his guards had stepped back, their spears lowered. He was alone on his velvet-draped stage, stripped of his lies and his authority. Elias looked at the man who had stolen his life and felt nothing. No joy, no triumph, only the cold weight of the 30 years he could never get back. As the chaos reached a fever pitch, a loud, grinding sound echoed from the great clock tower. For the first time in 3 decades, the massive brass hands began to move, shivering with the effort of overcoming 30 years of rust. The clock struck once, a deep, mournful toll that silenced the entire square. But as the sound died away, a smell of smoke began to rise, not from the bonfires but from the base of the tower itself. A flicker of orange light appeared in the windows of the mayor's office. Elias looked at Clara and then at the mayor, whose eyes were wide with a new kind of terror. The reckoning had begun, but the fire was no longer under anyone's control. The truth has been spoken, and the fire has returned to Whispering Pines. But as the clock tower begins to burn, we are left with a final, chilling question. What do you think? Did Elias start this new fire to finish what the mayor began, or is the town's guilt finally manifesting in a way no one expected? Tell us your theories in the comments. The story is reaching its final embers. Join us for Chapter 5, The Final Strike, where everything ends. Don't forget to subscribe and keep the fire burning.